Again, I'm down here in the corner. So we left off with this graph, and I asked you to think about what. Well, I guess it was maybe the graph right before this. What determines happiness? And what I'm mostly interested in you thinking about is what percentage of your happiness is dependent upon the circumstances of your life. That means your job, your relationships, your money situation, um, where you're living, like the circumstances of your life. And if I told you that it was either 50%, 40%, or 10%, what would you say? Think about that, kind of make a guess in your head. This is where I miss really being with you. Um, so when I do this with groups, I'll get all of the three, but usually a lot of people will say 50%. And no, that's not the case. If I knew everything about your life, the circumstances of your life, not everything about you, but about the circumstances of your life, I would only be able to predict about 10% of your happiness, according to positive psychology and its researchers. So let's look at this. Yes, 50% they say is based on genetics, and they call that the happiness set point. I really don't like to get into that too much when I'm doing talks on it. This is a class, it's a little bit different, but um, yes, some of us are born, built, wired for greater optimism, cheerfulness, even. Those are part of, some of that is part of our personality trait, well, what we might call our temperament traits. Things that we're born with are more temperament than personality. Personality grows over time. But our temperament traits, and that can be studied in babies. But we all know that there are some infants who can manage more stimulation and input than others, right? Some can get cranky quicker and easier. Some are just happy go lucky. Some sleep through the night on the first night. Mine, not for 4 years. So, we all have different temperaments. Um, that does not mean that we are bound by our genetics completely. Keep in mind, there's a whole nother 50% here, right? And so 10%, yes, is circumstances. It's a very minor percentage. And how they might research something like this is that they look at people who have had major upkicks in their happiness level, like winning the lottery. And then they look at others who, I think specifically it was like people who had been in an accident and perhaps lost their ability to walk, or something like this, something that would really be difficult and challenging, especially to your happiness level. And they look at that. And especially for the people who had the big upkick in happiness, like winning the lottery, they found that given enough time, um, that they would come back to a baseline, that we have sort of a ceiling, as it were, or a baseline of happiness that we manage on a day-to-day basis. And that might be our genetic level. So that's our set point. So no matter the circumstances, we all kind of have that level. Now there is this whole other 40%. And so I want you to think about, what do you think that is? What makes up this 40%? It's a big percentage. I'll get students that say, you know, what you do, your attitude. Yes, and so yes, in a book called The How of Happiness, the author Sonia, and with her name not in front of me, I will really mess it up in pronouncing it. I know it starts with an L, so I won't say it. Um, I believe they call it intentional activities. I call them in my class personal practices. But it's the things that we can do, the things we can control. We cannot control our genetics completely. We're learning a little bit about how genetics can be um, influenced, but circumstances, some of them we have complete control over, some of them we don't. We cannot control what we're born into, things like that. Who are family by blood is, but intentional activities are definitely things we can control. What do we choose to do? What habits do we choose to put into action in our daily lives? Do we choose things that can increase our levels of optimism and resilience and well-being and happiness? or do we not? And so, do we do things that can help us increase those levels? Those are the practices that I like to talk about. Um, or do we not? And for some reason, my thing isn't working. Oh, shoot, shoot. Oh, no. I'm sorry. Hold on. Give me a second. Not going to redo it all. Okay, here we go. So, make sure that I'm on the right one here, guys. I'm sorry. This is what happens if you're in a real, if you're in a, you are in a real class. If you're in a ground class, right? These little things happen. We have to deal with them. I don't know what's happening. Um, okay, hedonic adaptation, the hedonic treadmill and habituation. So if we do, so what happens with looking to our circumstances for our happiness? And a lot of us, we can do that in life, right? Things are going great, we're really happy. Things aren't going great, we're not. And so we get on this like roller coaster of well-being and happiness based on how things are going in our life. But when we base our happiness on circumstances, it tends to be temporary. Um, because even if things are going really well, we can get really used to what that is, what really well is, and we kind of habituate to it. See, I knew that was going to happen. I'm sorry, something's going on with the computer here. Um, we can habituate to it, and then we need something more than that to be happy. And that gets boring, or it gets, status quo. We're no longer happy with it. And so we see this hedonic adaptation, even if we're kind of going for the good, the feel good life, it can get old and boring. And so just basing things on circumstances can take us on this either roller coaster or plateau us out. And it can be, you know, pleasure can be very temporary. That's what I tend to talk to my classes about a lot. It's like, what's the difference between pleasure and happiness? So we want to think about happiness in terms of something a little deeper, not just being happy and cheerful, but something even firmer built inside of us that's a state of being that's not so temporary and based on our circumstances. So we're going to talk about in positive psychology and Martin Seligman's positive psychology. He has these 5 tenets. Um, Positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment, and looks at all of these as being pieces of the pie to our greatest state of happiness. If we want to get off that hedonic treadmill of just continually trying to find things that make us happy and feel good, which honestly can lead to addictions and even depression and so forth when we can't seem to get there, or we need more, need more, need more of something to bring us happiness. So he says these are all pieces of the pie that we need to consider when we're trying to be more well-rounded and holistic in our look of what brings us happiness and joy. So the first one being positive emotions. I'm going to put over here so I'm not in the way. Positive affect, affect being kind of the emotions, experiencing positive emotions, and very approach oriented. So positivity, positive emotions makes us want to approach something. It feels safe, it feels good, it makes us want to go toward it. Negative affect is avoidance oriented. We want to avoid, it feels threatening, it feels too challenging or painful, and it has avoidance orientation. So, as I said, psychology not long neglected positive things because it was always looking for what was wrong and how to fix it. So, positive psychology looks at what's right, what's good, and how we grow it. Cheerfulness, joy, amusement, positivity, trust, gratitude, forgiveness, and optimism. Optimism is always a big one. Um, and optimism is a tricky word. There's different kinds, and we'll talk about that because sometimes it can be like, oh, just always seeing the bright side. And that's a wonderful thing. It doesn't come natural to everybody. And so we have to also think of all of these things as skills that we can grow. If positive affect is not something that comes naturally to us, are there ways, and that's what we talk about in this whole class, the ways that we can build these within us. These are skills. We have to stop thinking about them as just traits that we either have or don't have. Some people do have them more naturally, that's part of their genetic makeup, but those that don't can grow them. There is a heritable quality to this. Some are born more naturally cheerful. But learning resilience and optimism, the ability to persevere, problem solve, and recognize options is key. And that's what I really like you to think of as optimism, the ability to persevere, that's also resilience, to problem solve and recognize options. Not just be happy in the face of anything, but also to just see that there's a wider array of options within any circumstance. That's how optimistic we are. So, in the module for week 3, there are videos, and this is one of them with Martin Seligman talking about PERMA. And so I'm not going to play it on here. I encourage you stop now actually and go back and go and watch that if you like, or do it all later, whatever suits you. So talk about optimism a little bit. There's different kinds. So dispositional optimism, that's your disposition. That would be somebody maybe who is genetically optimistic. It's a tendency to expect positive outcomes. With enough practice, um, we can alter traits. There's a wonderful book called Altered Traits. Can we alter our traits with practices? Yes, we can, and habits, and we'll talk about that. Explanatory style of optimism. We see bad events as temporary, situational, and external. Pessimists see them as enduring and internal in cause. So optimists will see bad events as just something that happened out here. It's not who I am. I am not bad, and therefore bad things happen. But it's just something that's happened out here. It's situational, it's external. I can overcome this. Pessimists will see it as longer lasting because it's something internal and within me. Learned optimism or flexible optimism seek and learn to find connections between effort and outcome. So we grow hope by looking at things that happen to us and then noticing how our different efforts bring about different outcomes. Optimists are able to see a variety of options to a situation. So I call this a lens of possibility. When we're under stress, we have a very narrow lens of what we see as possible, what our options are in a situation. When we can open up or widen up our lens of possibility, we see there's always at least about 3 options where we can either adapt to what is, we can try to change what is, we can get out of what is, but we do recognize, and then if we widen and widen, there might be other options. If this, doesn't work out, then what might I do otherwise? Where a pessimist will just close that up and not see anything, any other options. So that's kind of on one side. And then Sarah Schneidner talks about realistic optimism, which I think is very interesting. It doesn't involve self-deception or convincing oneself of desired beliefs without appropriate reality checks. It's not about saying, oh, everything's wonderful if it's not. It's about being realistic, but it's about still seeking um, opportunities in something. So give the benefit of the doubt to self and others. Appreciate the moment, find gratitude in the moment, seek opportunities, and engage in reality checks. What's possible in this moment, what's not, what do I need to do to get to that moment, and so forth. So you might see here on the left, Seligman's approach is known as the ABCDE model of learned optimism. That there's adversity is the situation that calls for a response. Belief, what we think about it, is how we interpret it. Consequence is the way that we behave, respond, or feel to it. Those are the consequences we will experience. Disputation is the effort we expend to argue or dispute the belief. And then energization is the outcome that emerges from trying to challenge our beliefs. So this is really big when something bad happens and we're like, oh, this is just the way things go for me. This is just the way my life is. This is just because of this or whatever. And so we have to put forth some effort to look at our beliefs, engage them, and call out what isn't real and energized towards something, letting something new emerge from that recognition. Okay, see that? All right. So I'm going to stop there. Go to the next one.